president, in which he outlined the role he thinks America's military should play in the world, and at the end wrote this: because you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours on these and other subjects, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position. The tone of the letter suggesting he and the president were not seeing eye to eye at all on the Syria decision. Many of the president's allies aren't either. In fact, he only seems to have a handful of supporters, in the government anyway. And just before Mad Dog Mattis' resignation, another bombshell, we learned that the president is also considering a withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, where there are currently 14,000 American soldiers stationed. Some reports say the withdrawal process could begin as early as next month. So, is the president going it alone here? And what effects will the Syria decision and the Mattis resignation have on foreign policy and national security? Let me ask former CIA officer and host of the Buck Sexton Show podcast. It's Buck Sexton. Buck.
Good to see you, Tom.
Yeah, so let's start with Mattis. Obviously, a direct response to the Syria pullout, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to understand why the Syria pullout has upset Mattis in this way, or as he put it, as a difference of opinion on the issue. It's twofold, really. On the one hand, you have the possibility of a vacuum forming here that would be filled by either more external actors. You obviously have the Russians, you have the Iranians, and possibly the Islamic State. So you have these different players that are all vying for that space if we were to pull out U.S. military presence. So that's a big part of it. Essentially the rebound of ISIS, or even if ISIS does lose more ground, lose more territory, because it's really bottled up right now, you have the Assad regime, the Russians, and the Iranians all at play. The bigger one, though, I think, Tom, is the Kurds and the Turkish threat to the Kurds. The Kurds have been our allies on the ground in this fight. They've been incredibly effective. They've fought valiantly, and they've been fighting alongside U.S. troops in Iraq as well as in Syria for a long time now. They've been a reliable and trustworthy ally, and the possibility of the Turks bombing them, which was a recent report just out in the last few days, the Turks might bomb them because they call them a terrorist group. That was, I think, just too much for Mattis, who feels like we have a debt of honor to the Kurdish people, and we need to pay that debt.
Now, tell me about the Turks. How do they feel about Trump pulling out? Because the Turks, they don't like Assad. They're not with Russia and Iran, right? But they also got a problem with the Kurds, too, right?
Their biggest concern by far in this is the Kurdish presence on their border. The Kurds are now controlling a big piece of territory that is contiguous along the Turkish border. And this YPG militia, which has now been turned into the Syrian Defense Forces, the SDF, they think of it as, and people argue about this, but they think of it as an extension of the former Marxist separatist group inside of Turkey, or on the outskirts of Turkey and in Turkey, the PKK. And so they say that this is a terrorist group, that essentially the United States has allied with a terrorist group, according to the Turks, in order to fight the terrorists of the Islamic State. So that is far and away their biggest concern, because they don't want there to be a Kurdish state on their border. They fear what that would mean for internal Turkish unrest, and that's far and away their biggest consideration in this whole process. So they'd be very happy if we weren't there, essentially as a bulwark against Turkish aggression vis-a-vis the Kurds.
Trump tweeted out that ISIS has been defeated in Syria. That's the only reason we're there is because of ISIS, under Trump anyway. What would you say to that statement? He says ISIS is defeated in Syria.
Well, it's tough. I mean, it's not true to say that they're eradicated. And what is defeat when you're talking about an insurgency? They did lose their capital city of Raqqa. There is no more caliphate. They control a piece of land about the size of Manhattan. So we're not talking about a lot of actual contiguous ground that the Islamic State can call their own, but they've become more of an early stage. They've gone back to being a more early stage insurgency where they've melted into the broader population. And that then means, well, what does victory look like? Then we get into a conversation about stable governance and a political solution and nation building, because that's really how you defeat an insurgency. And that I don't think the American people have any stomach for. And it's very easy, once you start taking on that mission, to see it expand very rapidly. So that's where I understand Trump's impulse here. And I think he's right on the broad strokes, and he's right in the overall strategy. It's the speed with which this decision has come out and the lack of process that I think has rattled a lot of folks. And then you've also got Mattis.
Well, yeah, president basically he wants to pull troops out of Afghanistan as well. Do you see him backing off on this? Obviously, Mattis doesn't think he's going to back off, or else he wouldn't have resigned, I'm assuming.
Well, I think Mattis did the honorable thing for him, which is to say, look, I don't see eye to eye, and I'm not going to be a part of this, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve, right? So I wish more administration officials of both parties would do this when they have a real disagreement and don't want to be a part of what's going on. That said, we're not winning in Afghanistan. We are in a holding pattern in Afghanistan. There is no realistic chance of defeating or eradicating the Taliban in Afghanistan. In fact, you can look at some reports that would suggest the Taliban are in control of more territory in Afghanistan than at any time since 2001 right now. So the situation there is actually quite bad, and we're really just there as a stopgap measure to prevent a run on some of the Afghan provinces where you'd actually have the Taliban in control. Yeah. He's not going to pull out until probably the spring is what we're hearing right now. He would have the number of troops from 14,000 to about 7,000. You know, we either can stay forever or we can start pulling out. I mean, there's not going to be, there's no new, one thing that should be clear, Tom, there's no new strategy, there's no silver bullet, there's no magic box. We have tried over and over variations on the same theme of nation building, durable institutions, an Afghan army that can defend itself.